One of the biggest things that have helped me be successful in fantasy football is paying attention to every single game every single week. And what I mean by that is not checking out. A lot of people will catch like 3 losses in a row and then just check out of the game. And grinding the numbers each and every single week, you can win your fantasy football league. That being said, it does start with running backs, so let's go ahead and jump into them. Jumping into the S tier, it's all guys you know and love. They're auto starts. You're not questioning whether you should start them. But in A tier, you are. Now, A tier, there are some guys you might have question marks about, so I do want to get into them. Jahmyr Gibbs versus Washington. Now, he's had 2 bad games out of the last 3 games. You got to ride the lows if you want to get the highs. Over the past month, DeAndre Swift and Javonte Williams rushed for over 100 yards against them. That should give you some confidence in Jahmyr Gibbs this week. Now, Derrick Henry versus the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings have bottled up some running backs recently, most recently being Jahmyr Gibbs and Saquon Barkley. Derrick Henry this week, but temper your expectations. And then Rico Dowdle. This guy is the man. The Packers haven't let a single running back room rush for over 100 yards this season, and Rico Dowdle did it by himself in Week 9. Now, Dowdle gets to face the Saints, who have allowed the 6th most rushing yards to running backs. Now, let's go to B tier. It starts it off with Mr. Bucky Irving. Right now, he is not practicing on Wednesday. Wednesday practices don't scare me, but it should be a concern. We would expect at least a limited practice here this week. If he does play, it's not a great matchup versus the Patriots. The Patriots have allowed the fewest rushing yards in the entire NFL. If Bucky does become inactive for any reason, be sure to come by one of my live streams if you haven't already. I'm live on YouTube each and every single day. We discuss trades, rankings, start sits, you name it. But if you can't make it to one of those live streams, that's perfectly fine as well. My rankings can always be found in my bio. Now, Quinshon Judkins versus the Jets. There's no indicator if Judkins will play this week. He's another player who we have to monitor. It's still earlier in the week. It is Wednesday. Now, I imagine if he does play, he should be just fine here this week. He gets to play the Jets, who are 22nd against running backs, and they just traded away 2 of their key defensive players. Now, Ashton Jeanty versus the Denver Broncos on Thursday Night Football. It is not a great matchup. The Broncos have allowed the 5th fewest points to running backs. The Raiders are 8.5-point underdogs and a 42.5-point over-under, so the scoring isn't projected to be high. What is encouraging about Ashton Jeanty, though, is he's getting bell cow usage. He got all of the running back carries, and he also had 5 targets in Week 9. Now, J.K. Dobbins versus the Raiders on the other side of the ball. Dobbins has gotten 15 opportunities in all but 1 game. He doesn't get used in the passing game, but I wouldn't expect this game script to go negative versus the Raiders. Again, they are favored in this matchup on Thursday Night Football. For those concerned about R.J. Harvey, at least on the ground, Dobbins has gotten 11 carries inside the 10-yard line. Harvey only has 2. Harvey does have 2 targets inside the 10-yard, and Dobbins has 0. Jaylen Warren versus the Chargers. He gets almost all of the work for the Steelers. The Chargers aren't a bad matchup. They're middle of the pack. On the season, though, the Chargers have allowed almost 5 yards per carry to running backs. And then Travis Etienne versus the Houston Texans. I saw a tweet by Eden Harditz on X. He posted that Travis Etienne got tackled at the 1-yard line 5 times over the course of 3 different drives in Week 9. Naturally, of course, he scored 0 touchdowns. Per his data, this is the most rushing attempts that ended at the 1-yard line in a single game since 2017, almost 10 years. TLDR is Etienne should have had more points had he gotten in. I went back and I watched the film as well. He looked amazing in Week 9, breaking a lot of tackles. There was one where Max Crosby had him in the backfield, and he breaks that tackle and ends up gaining yards on the play. Etienne is arguably a buy low candidate right now because he doesn't have any extremely hard matchups through the rest of the season. And then DeAndre Swift versus the Giants. Everyone wants to talk about Kyle Monangai, the new hotness, and I get it. I don't think we should forget that while Kyle Monangai did look awesome, it was against the easiest matchup for running backs, which is the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, that being said, the Giants are the 2nd easiest matchup for running backs. If Swift plays, he should be played over Kyle Monangai. He's still the guy. He just happened to miss this game due to injury. But I do have Monangai in C tier. Spoiler alert, you'll see him in just a moment. But if Swift happens to miss the game here in Week 10, Kyle Monangai goes from my running back 21 all the way up to my running back 13 or 14. And speaking of C tier, let's go ahead and get into it. Starting it off with Aaron Jones versus the Baltimore Ravens. He looked awesome in Week 9. He had 11 touches for 98 yards. He's dealing with a shoulder injury right now, but if he plays, it's a 48.5-point over-under, and the Ravens have allowed the 4th most fantasy points to running backs. The Ravens have looked better against running backs as of recently, but he still should be a solid running back 2 if he suits up. And then Breece Hall versus the Cleveland Browns. He wanted out of New York so bad. If you got to see him tweeting, he was tweeting everything under the sun. Now, Breece Hall arrives to practice today looking like Will Smith from Fresh Prince, wondering where everybody went. The Browns haven't allowed a running back to rush for over 91 yards this season, and they've only allowed 3 total touchdowns to running backs. If you're starting Hall this week, it is the lowest over-under of the week. You're hoping he can get there off of pure volume or receptions in a PPR league. And then Kyle Monangai, again, I talked about him already when I talked about DeAndre Swift, but the TLDR is it's the second easiest matchup for running backs, and Monangai is still playable even if Swift suits up, but he's definitely a smash play if Swift happens to miss this week. And then Kenneth Walker versus Arizona. He split the work with Charbonnet still after the bye. 13 opportunities for Walker to Charbonnet's 9. I thought the Cardinals' defense looked great against Dallas on Monday Night Football. Against running backs, Cardinals are middle of the pack. What is encouraging coming out of the bye is Walker got the only 2 carries inside the 10-yard line. That is typically where Zach Charbonnet makes his hay. And then David Montgomery versus the Commanders. The Lions are 9.5-point favorites on the road, 49.5-point over-under. Coming out of the bye, Monty got more opportunities than Gibbs in Week 9. Now, that's the only second time that's happened this season. It's not prescriptive, but the matchup is a little easier this week, and the Commanders have allowed the 10th most rushing yards to running backs. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the running backs in D tier. It starts off with TreVeyon Henderson versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We finally saw no Ramondre Stevenson in Week 9, but that did not stop the coaching staff and Mike Vrabel from making sure that TreVeyon Henderson was not the bell cow. Yet again, they put another inefficient back in the backfield. Terrell Jennings vultured the goal line touchdown from Henderson. At the time of this recording, we don't know if Ramondre Stevenson will be back, but we do know that TreVeyon Henderson will not get all of the work, which again, we shouldn't have fully expected that because he is a smaller back, and that's pretty rare in the NFL. Tyron Tracy versus the Browns. He got less opportunities than Devin Singletary in Week 9. I still have Tracy higher, but not by much. It's just because I still believe he is the better player, so he's going to be more efficient with his touches. If he ends up getting more touches, that's just icing on the cake. It's a 47.5-point over-under, and the Bears have had a lot of shootouts this season. Now, Kamani Vidal versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. He faced one of the easiest matchups for running backs in Week 9 and failed to deliver for us. Vidal has been red light, green light this season with his matchups, having a good game, bad game, good game, bad game. Now, I promise I'm not punishing him here by putting him this low. It is a much harder matchup in Week 10 than it was in Week 9. The Steelers are 8th best against running backs. They stop the run, but they allow you to throw all over them. It also doesn't help that the Chargers just lost Joe Alt. And RJ Harvey versus the Raiders. I saw another tweet by Ian Hartitz. He was talking about RJ Harvey having the most fantasy points per touch among all running backs with a minimum of 50 touches. And that makes sense. When you have 5 touchdowns in 3 games on 20 touches, that's going to happen. Now, the volume isn't there. That's why he's a little bit lower, but he's officially running hot with touchdowns. So if you want to chase that, be my guest. And then Jordan Mason versus the Baltimore Ravens. It's a juicy matchup this week, but if Aaron Jones suits up, you should move on from Jordan Mason. All right, now going into E tier, you know you are in trouble if you were starting some of these guys, but maybe, just maybe, you have Chase Brown or Javonte Williams on bye. So I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt, but just 2 guys that I want to talk about here. Obviously, Rachaad White versus the Patriots. If Bucky Irving were to miss, Rachaad White probably elevates all the way up to C tier. And Amari DiMercado versus the Seahawks. He was the most efficient running back in Week 9 among him and Bam Knight. We saw no Michael Carter. So that's why I do have Amari DiMercado ranked higher than Bam Knight. He's just more efficient with his touches. But you'll have to wait and see later on in the week on how the Cardinals announce how they're going to be doing their running back room this week. In F tier, I can't advise starting any of these guys because they're almost all handcuffs or backups. Again, if you haven't already subscribed to the YouTube channel, I do go live each and every single day. If you want to check out my individual rankings, because they will adjust throughout the week, you can do that with the link in my bio.